Gordon. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a very special forms class. Today, we are going over the complete home inspection process. I'm not even going to say contingency because there's just so many things we're actually going to cover. We're covering the complete inspection process. And the very first thing we are going to start out talking about is a nice little lawsuit that just came up in New Mexico. Has anybody heard about this one? No. No? Well, first, let me share my screen because I want to make sure you guys see the forms we're going to be talking about. I need to get to the right one here. All right. So what happened in this lawsuit is the listing broker listed a seller's property. The roof looked iffy. They said, hey, we'll deal with it, come time when we get a buyer and during inspections. So they get a buyer. Buyer has an inspection. And sure enough, they ask for the roof to be replaced. It needs to be replaced. It's at the end of its life, and it actually has areas where it's failing. So the seller says, okay, I'll agree to do it. Tries to find a roofing contractor, just can't find someone. So the broker says, I got you. Right? That's what we often do. We're like, yep, we got you. I'm going to take care of you. I got this. I'm going to find you someone good, whatever. So the broker finds a roofing contractor. The roofing contractor comes out, gives a bid. And then at that point, gives the bid to the seller, and seller says, okay, yeah, this is good. Hires the contractor. What do you think happened?
Fail.
Even worse. Roofing contractor came, the house was vacant. Contractor came, got it up. He had to replace sheathing and everything. So it was like a pretty bad, replacement and everything. He's in the attic and he's stomping around and kicking, insulation and things. And guess what he does? He pulls wires loose, breaks wires because they were loose before or whatever. What he says, well, yep, burnt the house down to the ground.
Oh.
Completely burnt the house down. Okay. So, oh yeah, before it closed, buyer's like, hey, sorry about your home, bye. And so the seller's like, well, I got to go after this contractor. Contractor's not licensed. He wasn't bonded. And then the broker referred them. So who do you think the seller sued?
The broker.
And their firm. Yep, sued them for $489,000. So I wanted to start out today's class just to talk about this because this lawsuit just happened. So this is just really, really recent. So the very first form we're going to talk about is the 41D. If you guys are referring anybody to the buyer, I want you to keep in mind three things. One, you need to make certain that they are licensed and bonded if you're referring them. Okay? Because if they're not and something happens, they're going after you. The next thing I want you to keep in mind is give at least three. Don't ever just give one. It's going to protect you a little bit more. So at least they'll the seller can, do their due diligence. I would say, you can have this form pre-filled in, and we're not going to, because we got to go over so much today. I'm not going to go through this one completely, but realistically, you need to name who the inspector is and the nature of your relationship. So realistically, what they're looking for is if there's a familial, relationship there at all. If you know, that inspector you're referring, if they're a family member or whatever, you got to disclose that. Because if you don't do that, you're in trouble. You could be in trouble.
So what if we get calls all the time from past clients asking for people? Are we liable even though we're not under contract with them or?
I'm not an attorney, nor have I played one on TV, but you know, anybody can sue anybody for anything at any time, at any place. So it's really hard to like determine what someone might sue you for. So I would say, even if you're doing something then, I would say, get this list together for your top like VIPs. And just say, here, here's my top 3 roofers, and you gotta make sure you know that they're licensed and bonded, right? And then I would just do that, just to CYA.
So Eric, we should be using the inspector referral form for contractor referrals?
All of them. I mean, for in a deal, if you're in a transaction, I think I would go ahead and do that. You can list them out. This is specifically for inspectors. But if you give one, you know, sending via email, try to give 3. And again, make sure that they're licensed and bonded. And if they're not, then disclose that they're not. And then at least they can take on that responsibility. But yeah, this form, I'm sorry, is specifically for home inspectors for, you know, in Washington State. So
Is there a form for contractors?
no, there's not. So just do it via email, give at least 3. And again, more importantly, licensed and bonded. And if you have any relation or a familial relationship in there at all, I would disclose that,
Yes,
just to be safe.
the relationship, so do we just leave that blank or do we put?
No, if it's a relationship have worked with in the past. They've done, yeah, or have worked with my office in the past. I think that's good enough. All right. Let's jump to our next form, which is going to be the 35. Here's our 35R. Not that one. I gotta jump around a little bit because we got a lot of forms to the. Where are you? All right, so here we go. Inspection addendum to purchase and sale agreement. General comments. Use. Form 35 allows buyer to terminate the agreement by sending a notice of disapproval of the results of the inspection within the agreed upon time. This form covers a variety of inspections a buyer may want to perform, including a general inspection, structural, hazardous materials, roof, pest, and other inspections. B, Tony, you want to read B?
Inspection notice form 35R. Form 35 is designated to be used with form 35R inspection response. We will use form 35R when buyer wants to give notices relating to inspection. Buyer has the right to terminate the transactions based on the inspection without giving seller an opportunity to address the problems buyer discovers in the inspection. Alternatively, the buyer has the option for request modifications to the property or the agreement, in which case the forms provide a procedure for negotiating for those corrections.
All right. C, explain it to the parties. This form involves complex procedures. Be sure that your client understands it, particularly explain to buyer that a failure to give a written notice of disapproval of the inspection within the time permitted will result in waiver of the inspection contingency, obligating buyer to purchase the property without seller making any repairs. Without a doubt, the home inspection process is the #1 item that designated brokers get questions on, hands down. But it's the whole gambit. It's everything. It's, can my buyer, you know, ask for their uncle to do the inspection because he's a licensed, he's a builder. Most of the questions always pertain to usually the repairs. And how do we write out the repairs? We're going to be diving deep into all those types of things to really give you guys a good foundation to utilize with every single client. That'll keep you really consistent, and it's just going to elevate your transactional excellence, you know, and what you do and what you provide to your clients. Because it is without a doubt there. I mean, probably already this year, I can think of at least 5 to where brokers have messed up the inspection contingency and basically waived it for their clients already this year. Luckily, none of them have been us. This have all been like with our sellers, but brokers have come to me like, hey, is this right? Like, why did they do this? The process has changed a lot too. And I think that's a big part that like why there's a lot more confusion out there. And so as we dive in deeper and peel back the layers of the onion, you guys are gonna see like it's gonna click like, oh wow, yeah, this is like one of the most important timelines in our contract. And if it gets messed up even a little bit, you're gonna end up waiving it for the buyer. And they're supposed to be buying it as is, just like we just read. All right, explain it to the parties. What do we got? Elizabeth, you want to read C?
This form involves complex procedures. Be sure that your client understands it. Particularly, explain to buyer that a failure to give a written notice of disapproval of the inspection within the time permitted will result in waiver of the inspection contingency, obligating buyer to purchase the property without seller making any repairs.
So here's again, it's like, there it is. It's just, it's gonna be waived. If this gets messed up, and there is many ways to mess this up. All right, D, licensed inspector. So, revised code of Washington 18-280-20 provides that beginning September 1st, 2009, a person shall not engage in or conduct or advise or hold himself or herself out as engaging in or conducting the business of or acting in the capacity of a home inspector within this state without first obtaining a license as provided in this chapter. Paragraph 1A provides that the general home inspection must be performed by buyer or a person licensed or exempt from licensing. So there are some exemptions in the RCW 18-280-20. Buyer may engage specialists, example, plumbers, electricians, roofers, etc., to conduct further inspections of the property. So that's a key thing, is that it's only going to be further inspections. Buyers cannot bring their uncle, who's a builder, to inspect the property. If you get someone who says, oh, yeah, my family member is going to come and do the inspection for me, I don't have to pay anything. They're a builder, and they've been building homes for 50 years. They know everything. What are you going to say?
But technically, they can do their own inspection, so they bring whoever they want as far as the party, right?
Well, I guess I want to question what an inspection, like by definition is, right? Because if someone shows up and they're just walking the property with this builder, is that okay? I mean, that's like, hey, I'm walking it and I just have this person with me.
Why we're having the
Well,
conversation.
and since you can get out of pending inspection without actually even doing an inspection, like that's kind of the thing, it's like.
So we just read that unless they're licensed, they are not allowed to perform an inspection on behalf of the buyer, unless they're licensed or it's the buyer themselves doing it.
Again, I question what's the inspection at what point in time? Because maybe the buyer's just like, yeah, I'm here to inspect it by myself and I have my uncle.
I would say, don't say anything about your uncle. Maybe he can have a conversation. Maybe the uncle's taking notes and he tells them at home. That's out of your sight, that's not being done and performed there. A licensed home inspector is to go through the entire property, do the types of inspections they're allowed to do, just like we read, and to make a report and to tell the buyer right there, like, oh yeah, that roof looks terrible. That's his professional opinion, right? If you have someone who's not licensed and doing that at the property, your buyer's in breach, because they're signing to this agreement that you're not going to bring someone unlicensed to the property to do an inspection. Question?
We could say to the buyer, you could do that, but that's for your own peace of mind. We're not gonna be able to ask the seller to fix anything.
But
Because
he
there's no
just said they're in
Right.
breach
Yeah.
just by bringing.
You're in breach.
this
You're,
person inspected.
when they signed the 35, they're gonna be agreeing that it says, and we're gonna dive in a little bit deeper onto that, into the wording
Good
of that,
question.
but
I think, sure, I think what you're getting at, it makes sense. The question is, can the buyer disapprove it based on his uncle's, opinion? And the answer is no, because uncle's not an inspector.
Right.
If the buyer brings his uncle, usually it's probably gonna have control over that. But the question is, can he disapprove it or ask for repairs based on that?
Well, and you could also say too that, you're trying to protect yourself. I mean, you have to protect yourself, because what if the uncle misses something major and then they say that you didn't help
Well, the
them?
buyer doesn't care.
okay, so
Or it's other-
let's go back in time at the beginning of this class. What was the first thing we started talking about?
Unlicensed
Mhm.
providers and referrals.
Bonded.
So if you bring someone unlicensed, starts inspecting the property, he's in the attic, trips over the wires, burns the house to the ground. Uh-oh, sorry seller about your home. Who do you think's gonna get sued in that little event?
The agent in the firm,
It's just, I don't know.
who has the deepest pocket?
Well, what happens if the seller finds out you got someone in the house that's doing inspections, not inspecting? Wouldn't I be like, hey, I can get out of this real quick?
Yeah, I mean, we have people have rings that get in trouble all the time, having their Ring cameras on and record. I mean, they're not supposed to do it, but if they hear that and they're like, hey, why'd you bring your uncle, to inspect the property?
At that point in time, right? Maybe my uncle's just there to like set the ladder up for me. I want to get that out and carry that. Are you
Eric?
serious?
Yeah.
So after the initial inspection that the buyer or a licensed inspector has to do, it mentions the specialist, but it doesn't say licensed specialist. So at that point, you could bring your uncle who's a contractor. Yes?
Well, again, I want you guys to keep that story in mind about this recent lawsuit. The person wasn't licensed and bonded. Apparently he was a really good roofer too. It wasn't about, he didn't even get a chance to even do the job. It's all about who are you guys allowing onto that seller's property? That's kind of like where I want you guys to think about. Yes, if the uncle is a licensed and bonded plumber and he's there to maybe do the additional inspections, I don't see an issue with that. But you may want to find out if he is licensed and bonded, and I'd probably verify it. It's not you being a jerk. It's like, who wants to be on the hook for damages? There is one of our sister offices had a little event where their client said kind of story, same thing of like, I'm gonna bring my family member, and that they're gonna like look over the inspection. And it was one of those things where, hey, I've got the inspector here. Yep, we're gonna be at the house at this time. So the broker didn't quite know about it, which is, that was the lesson that they learned, was like, oh shit.
Hey, Eric, I don't know if it's just me. We lost some connectivity here on sound. I can't hear you anymore.
There we go. Sorry. Looks
You're
like
good,
someone's
you're
there.
on.
There we go. All right, so the family member fell through the ceiling in the kitchen. Landed straight through the ceiling, landed on the countertop, fell to the ground, broke his arm. Okay, good times. Of course, they're just like, looking at, and the agent was called me and just like, oh my, like, you're not gonna believe this. No one's gonna believe me. Fell right through onto the countertop. And of course they were responsible. And then when the seller found out that they weren't even licensed, that they were retired. I mean, luckily they didn't get sued for it. They paid for all the damages, but it was like $7 grand. Cause they wanted new insulation and and we just told them like, hey, we don't really know. They ended up buying the house. So things worked out, but this is the type of thing, like, why, like, don't put yourself in danger. Ask questions. If the buyer's gonna say, yep, I've got it, scheduled, find out who it is. You better find out who it is and, are they licensed in the state of Washington to perform the inspection on behalf of the buyer? Otherwise, the buyer can actually do their own inspection. They are allowed. All right, inspection report. Let's see.
Inspection report, paragraph 4 of the inspection addendum provides that upon seller's written request, buyer shall provide the inspection related information specified by seller. Seller can request a copy of the inspection report, portions of the inspection report related to buyer's request, repairs or modifications, or the inspector's recommendation for additional inspection by checking the application box in paragraph 4B. Seller's selection of any checkbox in paragraph 4B is not considered a counteroffer. Seller can also make the request using notice of seller consent inspection report form 35C.
Okay, this is our very, very first booby trap. Okay, we got to talk about this section. On the form itself, on the 35, there's this newly updated section right here, 4B, that a seller can request the full inspection report, pages of the inspection report, or the inspector's recommendations of the inspection report, which how it used to be in order to even kick in the additional inspections. This is catching people right now. To this year so far, we've had buyer brokers waive the full inspection because they sent over pages. They sent over pages with a home inspector's recommendation with their 35R. And because the seller did not request it, they waived it. We had two instances. One where the boxes were not checked at all by the seller. This section is only for a seller. It is only for a seller to mark. You as buyer brokers cannot mark this. You can't write up your deal and say, hey, if I want additional inspections, I'm going to tell you what I'm giving you. You cannot do it. So this almost takes us back in time when we didn't have to do it before, many years ago. For those of you who've been in the business for at least like 14 to 15 years. It used to kind of be that way. So it's like now we're like going back to where you don't send anything at all unless the seller wants something. And how do you know is where you have mutual on this. So like we just read, or Hayden just read, it's not even a counterable change. This is not something that you're gonna, like your seller, listing brokers here, you're not gonna have your seller mark this box and then make them initial next to it. It's not a counterable change at all. This is just the section for them to decide if they want pages of it. Do they want the whole report? Or in the event of additional inspections that they must send the home inspector's recommendations along with it.
What if they don't? Like, what if we get it back, it's not checked, nothing?
Well, by the buyer broker? You're a buyer broker?
No, by the listing agent doesn't have the seller check a box.
Yep.
And they send it back.
That means you are sending nothing but a 35R.
Are with one of the boxes checked, but no attachments to it.
But so if I ask for things and I send pictures, it's automatically waived.
Yeah.
So when did that change? Cause I feel like that third box is somewhat new. Last year and a half.
They've updated, yeah, because you
Okay,
remember they've added it. Yeah, they did the first two.
Yeah.
And then they're like, hey, you know what? Let's take it back to how we used to have it
Right.
before, where,
Okay.
because it was getting people. It was catching people like, wait a minute, are we supposed to do? And there's still
Yeah,
people,
super.
there's people falling on this one. And we literally just had one less than a month ago. One of our listing brokers got an offer. They countered it. They accepted it. They didn't quite see this box was checked. They didn't see it. It was very faint. It was one of those little, like they must have done it with pen. but the buyer broker did it. And our listing broker was like, what the hell are you doing? You sent us the inspection pages. And they're like, yeah, we need additional inspection. Like, we didn't want anything. I did not have my seller mark a box. He's like, and they were like, what are you talking about? And they were, basically the broker started fighting. The DBs had to get involved and talk it out. And I'm like, it's waived. We never marked this.
But if you don't have them initial it, how do you know, I mean, that could be a good fight.
So truth be told, in that situation, who's right?
The listing, the buyer.
Who's right?
Whoever's on the contract, right? Right, isn't that our job to check over
Who do
everything?
you think's right?
I said the listing agent,
You think listing agent's right?
the buyer.
Well, you said the buyer checked this box and sent it over?
Yeah.
Oh,
But they're not
yeah,
supposed
this
to.
is supposed to be a seller thing, so, yeah.
You guys tell me, what would you do in that situation if that came to you, and you're the listing broker?
The listing broker.
Oh,
Yeah.
Listing broker should have done it.
The listing
Yeah.
agent screwed
Yeah,
up.
listing broker, I didn't hear that part. Okay.
But
The buyer.
who would be the right? Who would be the right?
That-
Nobody.
Nobody, yeah, they're both wrong and they're both right. See what I'm saying?
That's
So what,
fun transaction.
yeah, but this is the stuff that's happening right now because people either don't understand the forms or they don't understand the process, or they don't understand the changes that have happened.
Yeah, but the waiver, that's 3 years old now.
The waiver?
Like if you send the. A.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Send that in, like, but people still,
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
still sent, we had
and
someone send a
nonstop.
full inspection report this year
yeah.
without even asking.
But there is also another form, right, that like, let's say they said, no, they don't wanna see any of that.
We're gonna get there, Tony.
What if you left it blank? And now you did your inspection, you asked for money.
Oh, wait, now you're asking.
You're asking for money.
Mhm.
And now can the seller check one of these boxes after you've been countered?
No, perfect. That just takes us right into the next phase here, and that's exactly what Tony's saying. Okay. There is another, and I got it the first time here. All right. There is the same section on its own form. Okay, the 35C is the seller's request for an inspection report, and it's the exact same boxes. Okay. But I want you guys to recognize something on this form. It's exactly the same. What is there not on this page after you've got mutual? There's no section for buyer signatures or initials. So good luck getting a buyer to agree later. We had this yesterday. I'm not even kidding. We had this actually happen yesterday. They're like, our broker said, hey, they're asking for additional inspections. Do we have to allow it? You already agreed to it,
Right.
but we want to know why. You never, let's look at your 35. Where did you want to see the home inspector's recommendations before you agreed to give that, right? No, nothing was marked. So I'm like, well, you can always try to send this now, but does the buyer have to do it? No,
It's a notice, not a.
I know, it's just a notice.
Hey, Eric,
Yeah,
on my deal, remember when I called you, I think a couple of months ago? So, I was the listing agent, and when they did the, inspection, they asked for that, additional time to have, contractors come in.
Yep.
And when they sent that form, he actually included part of the inspection report, which we have marked at all. And, but it came down to, okay, well, we're just gonna walk away during the financing, come up with something like that. So I went ahead and, I asked my seller, because at this point, it's like, we want to see what they're talking about. And I had sent my seller that form and send it back to the agent requesting specific to the items pertained.
Yeah, so, exactly right. This is a notice form. There's only one signature on it. It's meant to allow permission to give pages or the full inspection report or the pages pertaining to the home inspector's recommendations. This form is to be used in the event you are in the situation of, okay, the seller sent maybe the buyer broker has sent the 35R over asking for a price reduction. Right? Now you're like, okay, now you've got something to kind of negotiate with, right? You're like, okay, you want this, we want to make sure it's worth it. Now it's time to have the conversation with your seller and say, okay, is it time, should we request just. You see, like when it's money, when they're asking for money, who knows what it is? Is it a big ticket item? Is it every single item in the entire inspection report added up? So you really got to have a good conversation with your seller and be strategic on, okay, what are we going to request here? Should we request, them to send just the big items? Should we request, you really you're gonna have to, have a good conversation to get a strategy together, and you're really gonna have to up your communication with the buyer broker and try to like work it out to be able to get the right things you want to get requested. Because you got to keep in mind, if the buyer broker sent the 35R and says, yeah, seller replaced the roof, the failing roof prior to closing at seller's expense. The seller's like, no way, I'm not doing that. They say no, buyer leaves. They're like, gone, we're terminating. What does the seller have a duty to do now? What'd you say?
Disclose.
Disclose. Now I'm gonna have to update their disclosure.
From an inspector.
Huh?
They didn't see any, that's why I thought this came into play, because I didn't think they had a duty to disclose, because they don't have anything from an inspector. That's just at that point,
write it up that way.
that's why this came into play. So at that point, they don't have to disclose.
Yeah.
But isn't the buyer's agent even putting the word failing roof? Right. Suddenly it seems to me that.
Yeah, it's opinion.
Right.
That's
So
Yeah,
okay.
you're right.
They have to disclose that.
It's a duty disclose if they've got it, but. I mean, obviously, there's some, yeah, I
They may
mean,
not even have a duty disclosure if they have it.
Yeah.
Because that's one worker's opinion who's looking for a job, whereas somebody else could certify them.
maybe,
Somebody said, there's probably not a certified here as well.
Maybe.
So again, it's just an opinion, so even though you get that,
yeah.
it's not hard, it's not hard and fast rules.
So if you get it,
Disclosure issue.
conversation time,
Conversation.
definitely conversation time with the seller.
Because I've never been told that you can't read stuff up in the report or the response.
And one thing I would not get into anymore,
Mhm.
traditionally, when we're negotiating. You call the buyer broker agent, and the buyer broker is just like, can you do, or pardon me, the selling agent. And we're the selling agent. Sorry, let me start. Normal conversation with an agent is gonna go something like this. Hey, we're sending the 35R over, we're asking for $5,000, $10,000, whatever. The listing agent is like, can you tell me kind of what's wrong? That's how it used to go, right?
Mhm.
Oh, it's the roof, it's this, that, and everything else. Do not get caught up into having that honest conversation with the broker, because now you're disclosing, remember, you're representing your buyer. It's happened to me recently, where they're like, can you just kind of tell me what it is? And I'm like, no. Because we used to be just have that one-on-one conversation with the other agents, and we would work it out between agents, but now you're getting into a really gray line.
And
Are you-
why is that? Sorry, go ahead.
Are you saying that because,
Because
or
disclosure.
if they haven't signed anything to send them something, having the conversation you're saying is breaking that and breaching that, and they're gonna say, oh, now you waived it, is that?
It's a really gray area right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't waive it.
Maybe, but you're disclosing something.
Yeah, you're giving information. It's a dangerous zone. I mean, no matter what, when you're having the conversation.
So as a listing agent, are you saying we shouldn't have the seller check any boxes?
No, I'm not saying that. It's, you gotta talk to them about the whole conversation.
Makes sense. want to see maybe just the pages of what they're asking for.
Maybe.
This seems to be the smart way to go.
Maybe.
Because this is a notice, right? So if I don't, I'm the listing agent.
Mhm.
We send you an agreement back, all signed, but I don't check a box.
Yep.
Therefore, essentially, to me, this is reserving the right to pick what I want later.
Right.
The buyer doesn't have to sign anything.
No, they don't.
So this is a notice saying, hey, this is, we're making up our mind now. We
Right.
don't have to make up our mind when we sign the agreement.
Exactly.
I like that.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You can, but think of it this, but you can't get the buyer to perform on it.
This
Yeah,
is a
that's
notice,
fine.
though.
No,
Yeah.
you can't get the buyer to perform.
You're not gonna
but
get
at
the
that
buyer
point
to
in time,
perform
you're
on it.
Deadlock anyway. They're asking for something. You're like, okay, yeah, let's play. And they're like, we don't want to. That's why I don't even really understand the danger zone. Because if somebody's not wanting to communicate on the other side, that's pretty shady. Like, nope, can't talk about it, but we want 10 grand. Nope, not gonna say anything.
Yeah, but,
Nope,
yeah.
not gonna
No, no,
supply
I'm
you
saying as a
anything.
listing agent too, like,
But
as a listing agent. you
No,
know,
that's what I'm saying. As a listing agent, you send this, they're like, nope, we're not gonna send you anything. At the time of mutual, you didn't check it. Okay, can you tell me a little bit about what's going on that inspection? Why are you asking for 10 grand? Nope, not gonna talk about it. Yeah. And then at the listing agent, you're like, you're not gonna say anything. You're protecting your buyer by not telling us anything. Like, no, we're not just gonna give you 10 grand willy-nilly.
But a notice is, you don't have a decision. Nobody's making a decision. We're telling you that you have to sell this stuff.
And you're asking,
Nah, it's,
Any
it's,
other notice in the MLS is not requesting, it is like, hey, I'm the public offering statement.
I know,
Finance.
I know where you're going. I know where you're going. But when we go through the rest of the, when we go through the rest of the 35 and 35R, there's nothing else that's in there that's saying, oh, in the event listing broker sends the 35C later, the buyer's got no choice but to send, like, they're not gonna follow up.
But I
It-
also don't know, why would the buyer not? They're trying to get something.
Yeah.
So to the
Most will.
They want to
Most will.
validate why they need this.
Exactly, most will, but and like Sierra's saying, like when you're at that, when you're fighting for your seller and you wanna get, you know, to the bottom of why do they want 10 Gs?
across
You
that.
know, most of the time, they're gonna give it up and kind of give you some information, but if they're not, what do you think Sierra's gonna tell her seller? Yeah, like, no way,
Yeah,
they're just fishing, we're not giving them nothing.
yeah, that's why I'm saying, and I don't, it's valid. And if it's not valid, then they're gonna tell them pound sand and move on. Take
Exactly,
it or leave it.
exactly, all right, let's keep going, you guys. Oh. No, okay. Let's get back. We did that one. All right. Additional time for inspections. Insert the number of days buyer has to obtain additional inspections. Additional time for inspections is permitted only if buyer's inspector recommends further evaluation by a specialist. Note. Once notice of additional time for inspections is given, buyer does not have to disapprove the initial inspection during the initial inspection period. Instead, buyer may accumulate defects in both of the inspections, the initial and the additional. Before taking further action, however, buyer must either disapprove or request modifications on or before the end of the combined initial and additional time for inspections period, or buyer will waive the inspection contingency. The period for additional inspections runs from the date buyer gives notice that buyer will seek additional inspections. It does not automatically run from the end of the initial inspection period set forth in paragraph 3 of the addendum unless buyer waits until the last day of the initial inspection period. Give notice of additional inspections. All right, let's look over here to some timelines. So we went into, deep about this, about what buyer's allowed to investigate. Sewer inspections, inspection of the property may or may not, if not checked. Pretty much these days, everyone's pretty savvy and pretty good about sewer lines, scopes and inspections. So definitely one of the most costly inspections, or excuse me, costly repairs in the event that you've got a bad sewer line. definitely, like, we had one in here where unfortunately one of the buyers bought a home without an inspection. Unfortunately got a $35,000 bill to repair their sewer line. Because part of it falls, there's a cost under their driveway in the corner of it, so they had to replace concrete too, so. Very, very expensive. Absolutely be making sure that their buyers are doing them. What's a good cutoff time for the home? Like for year built? Where would you feel safe?
There is none.
Thank you. That was a trick question. Trick question. There's really not. You have no idea how long it take. I mean.
In new
Even on
construction too.
construction. Thank
Yep.
you. New construction. Donnie?
My house in Renton, brand new, 3,500 square feet, beautiful, immaculate, didn't do a sewer line inspection. I'm living in it for 4 months and all of a sudden the sewer backs up. They hadn't connected the sewer line to the city sewer line and it overflowed. They immediately came and dug up my whole brand new yard and everything and hooked it up. Real
Wow, were
story.
you my neighbor? Were you my neighbor, Tony?
Yeah,
That happened to my neighbor in Renton too, same thing.
yeah, Astor Park Homes.
Wow.
Brand new construction, brand new, I'm the first one that lived in. Like 4 months later, oh,
Yeah.
ruined my wood floors, did the whole thing, it was old.
That's a crappy situation, Tony.
But it was a crap situation,
There's your joke for the class.
but I would have never have thought to do a sewer line, so.
Because there's still a
Yep.
sewer line before you reach the septic. And so we've been.
What's the responsibility for the homeowner? Where does their responsibility end? Do you guys know? Where?
At the main,
That's
the
right,
sewer main.
to the sewer main. So it's not just in your yard. You're like, oh, it's right here to the edge of my yard. Whoo, I'm only responsible for it. Nope, it could be really far. All right, that's my tip for that one for 1A. Doesn't matter the year built. Here's the buyer's obligations. Oh, yeah, we got to read this one. All inspections are to be ordered by buyer, performed by inspectors of buyer's choice, and C, completed at buyer's expense. Buyer shall not alter the property or any improvements on the property without first obtaining seller's permission. Buyer is solely responsible for interviewing and selecting all inspectors. Buyer shall restore the property and all improvements on the property to the same condition they were in prior to the inspection. Buyer shall be responsible for all damages resulting from any inspection of the property performed on buyer's behalf. So there's the little agreement that, oh, you bring your uncle there unlicensed and they fall through the ceiling. Buyer's gonna be totally responsible for all of that. Okay. Buyer's notice, the inspection contingency shall conclusively be deemed waived and seller shall not be obligated to make any repairs or modifications unless within 10 days by default, if not filled in, after mutual acceptance of the agreement. The initial inspection period, buyer gives notice, A, approving the inspection and waiving this contingency, B, disapproving the inspection and terminating the agreement, or C, that buyer will conduct additional inspections, or D, proposing repairs to the property or modifications to the agreement. If buyer disapproves the inspection and terminates the agreement, the earnest money shall be refunded to buyer. Here's the key language. All right, this is the key language to tell you what additional form you will include with the 35R. If the buyer's terminating, what's the additional form? What's the form number? Well, anybody?
51.
Nope.
35R, that's why.
35R and a 50. You have, if the buyer's earnest money is deposited with escrow, you must include a 50 and the 35R. Otherwise, the escrow is not gonna release the funds until they have an agreement between both parties. They're allowed to release those funds. Whenever you see this verbiage, if you see these words in an addendum and the buyer's electing to terminate within their right, then you know you need the Form 50 to go along with something. So this is, whether it's a 90 form, like buyer terminating on the feasibility, during, or terminating based on a review of the HOA, whatever it may be, the 50's gotta go with it, if that earnest money's deposited. The 51 is pretty much buyer wants to terminate or seller's trying to terminate without a legal excuse or without these words. That's typically what it's always gonna be. So if you're using a 51, probably no excuse to terminate.
Can we still use the KMS form, the 1001 for the deferring deposit?
I mean, I guess I have a lot of those in office clauses. I have a lot of those KMS clauses in our office clauses. So you can just click and add the one you want into a 34 or 22D page 2 of it. So. All right. If buyer proposes repairs to the property or modifications to the agreement, including adjustments to the purchase price or credits for repairs to be performed after closing, the parties shall negotiate as set forth in paragraph 6 below. The parties may use MLS Form 35R to give notices required by this addendum. All right. The first thing we talked about here is we got some days, right? If we don't talk about computation of time when it comes to the inspection contingency, it's one of the questions we constantly get calls on. I guarantee it. Jim gets these, Tony gets these, I get these. Like, I got mutual on this day. It looks like they got a 5-day inspection. Is that weekends and holidays or what? You know, everyone gets confused on the calculation. So we are going to go ahead and look at computation of time. Unless otherwise specified in this agreement, any period of time measured in days and stated in this agreement shall start on the day following the event commencing the period and shall expire at 9 p.m. I'm going to highlight that. So if you get it at 9 p.m., it's expired. 9 p.m. is the expiration deadline. So you have all the way until 8:59 p.m. Okay. Of the last calendar day of the specified period of time, except for the possession date. If the last day is a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday is defined in RCW 1:1650, the specified period of time shall expire on the next day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. Any specified period of 5 days or less, except for any time period related to the possession date, shall not include Saturdays, Sundays, or legal holidays. If the parties agree that an event will occur on a specific calendar date, the event shall occur on that date, except for the closing date, which if it falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, as defined in RCW 1:1650, or day when the county recording office is closed, shall occur on the next day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, legal holiday, or the day when the county recording office is closed. When counting backwards from closing, any period of time measured in days shall start on the day prior to the closing. And if the last day is a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday as defined in RCW 1:1650, the specified period of time shall expire on the next day. Moving forward, this is not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. Example, Monday or Tuesday. If the parties agree upon and attach a legal description after this agreement is signed by the offeree and delivered to the offerer, then for the purpose of computing time, mutual acceptance shall be deemed to be on the date of delivery of an accepted offer or counter offer to the offerer rather than on the date the legal description is attached. Time is of the essence of this agreement. Phew. No wonder people get confused on it and call us all the damn time. Couldn't they just broke it down a little bit easier for like how time works? All right, so in your guys' handouts, there is a calendar. All right, today is the 15th. The 15th. You got mutual acceptance today on your deal. You have a 10-day home inspection contingency. What day is your 35R due by? And by what time? Go ahead, calculate it.
Tuesday, the 28th at 9 p.m. 8:59 p.m.
28th.
Saturday, the 25th, 9 p.m. 9 p.m. on the 25th.
Yes.
28th.
And then
You said
25th.
what? 25th?
It's 28.
28th at 9 p.m.
I have heard 5 different dates so far in class.
It's 28th. It can't fall on a Saturday or Sunday, and then Memorial Weekend's on the 27th.
Can fall on a Saturday.
If it's 10 days. 10 days. 10 days.
Okay, so I just speed read through the whole thing and you guys seriously didn't catch it. Okay, I'm gonna break it down. I'm gonna break it down for you, okay? So mutual acceptance is the 15th. That's today. Computation of time says commencing day is when we start counting. Commencing day is just a fancy attorney word for the next day, the following day. Okay, so day 1 is the 16th. Day 2 is the 17th. Is day 3 the 18th?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if it's over.
I heard
5
a couple, I heard some no.
10 days for counting weekends.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not there.
You're counting weekends.
It does count.
Yeah, because it's 10 days.
5 days or less. Weekends and holidays do not count. But the confusing part that screws everybody up is, oh, if it's 6 and above, right? The weekends count, but where people mess up is you still can't land on a Saturday or Sunday or legal holiday when you're calculating. So that's the part that will get everyone, always. So in our case, we got mutual, 1 day, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Uh-oh, the 10th day lands on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. So we need to go to the next day. That's not 1. Oh, 26th is a Sunday. That doesn't count. In most cases, a Monday would count, but what is the 27th?
Legal
It's
holiday.
Memorial Day. It's a legal observed holiday for computation of time, right? So that day does not count.
It's
By
20
8:59 p.m. on the 28th, you must have that 35R over.
Boom,
Wow. I am floored.
boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, it's Florida.
A lot of people get this wrong. A lot. It's very, very confusing. All right, now let's look at the 5 days or less. Okay, today's mutual. Okay, commencing day. 1, 2, and
22nd.
count the weekend. 3, 4, 5. So the 22nd at 8:59 p.m.
They have to receive it.
It has to not only be signed, it must be what? What's the
Received.
word? Delivered, received. Yep, it's got to be received by that other party. There is a broker from one of my past offices that literally had an offer, had it signed, sent it back. It was a counter. They countered one teeny tiny little item. It was one little item. They sent it over. Couple hours later, what do you think happened? Ooh, much better offer came in.
Oh,
Much better offer came in at like 250,000 more. I
they
mean, it's
didn't send it to the office.
yeah, they were like, oh my goodness, we're gonna have to withdraw our counter offer. We still haven't got it. Haven't got it. This is in the evening, so they sent the withdrawal of offer, counter offer addendum. And they withdrew their counteroffer. And about 30 minutes later, the buyer broker called. Oh, hey, I just sent it to you. Just frantic and like, hey, and our broker said, I'm sorry. We never received the signed off counter. Like, no, my buyer signed it. The broker was busy watching the Oscars. Multi-million-dollar deal. And the sad thing is that when our broker did receive it, their buyers had signed it like hours before. Hours. So you guys, you cannot, what was the very last phrase when I read the computation of time? Time is of the essence. He who snoozes loses. All right? Yeah, so, okay, 6 days, right? It's above, anything 6 and above, right? They count, but still can't land on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it'd be the 21st. So it actually would be sooner than someone having 5.
So to me, I feel like if you put 6 on everything, you're good.
Well, the reason I printed out these calendars, right, is because you guys, when you're writing your deals, you absolutely, whenever you're dealing with, any contingencies, get your calendar out, pop it up into the month view. So you can look, where are we now? Where are the weekends? Oh, is there any legal holidays in here? Look at these things to help you calculate. That is how you really got to do it. You've got to visibly see the days so you can understand, like, okay, is it 5 and less, or is it 6 or greater? And you'll always come back to 5 or less. Weekends and holidays do not count. If it's 6 or greater, they count, but they still can't land on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. It'll be the following day if it does. That's the easiest way to remember computation of time.
And where was the form that had that language with the computation of time, Eric?
That is in our boilerplate language of every single purchase and sale agreement. So Form 21.
Just in the 21.
Yep, it's in the 21, it's in the 25, it's in the 28, it's in all of them. All right, let's continue our journey on the 35. Oh, gotta keep going. Oh, my word. Okay, so inspection report. Here's the section where buyer shall not provide the inspection report or portions of the report to seller unless seller requests otherwise in writing. Upon seller's written request, buyer shall provide to seller the inspection report, portions of the report, or the inspector's recommendation for additional inspections as requested by seller. Okay, so waiver of contingency by buyer. If buyer provides any portion of the inspection report to seller without seller's prior written request or consent, the inspection contingency shall conclusively be deemed waived. This is the part right here, right? A buyer signs this, but who typically violates this? Who violates this on behalf of the buyer?
Buyer's agent.
The buyer broker typically is the one who's doing this, right? Here you go. I'm being real helpful. I'm giving you, I highlighted all the items and the issues that's wrong with the house. And I'm serious, like that's one of the ones we got. They highlighted all the sections in the pages. Like, here's all the stuff we want done. It's waived. It's waived. I haven't heard yet. I haven't heard an update yet, but we actually had a very bad buyer broker. The person was terrible, terrible, terrible. I mean, our broker had to help them kind of like, and here, this was the only offer they got. So they were like, okay, I'm going to help you get this right and help them form the offer, put it together, kind of here, you better do this, do that. Help them. They said, oh, thank you. And what do you think happened? Inspection. Oh, they spent pages of the report. And they're just like, oh my gosh, are you serious? Like, hey, it's waived, we had to inform our seller. Like, no matter what, if they send it, we have to inform our seller of them violating, you know, of them being in breach, right? They're in breach of the agreement for giving pages because we never requested them. The broker, you know, the buyer was just so pissed because they were like, no, they're not doing anything. So we have no idea what the conversations were, but the buyer ended up having their lender say, hey, we can't get through this. I don't know, the agent and the buyer, the buyer wants to fire them and, you know, all this stuff. So the deal fell apart. The buyer came back 2 months later and called that her listing broker and is ended up working with them now, which is very odd. But it's obvious, like their broker didn't understand the forms, you know, so it's one of these things, like typically the buyer brokers are the ones who are putting their own buyers in breach. Jim?
Well, going back to the conversation about the 35C, the inspector report, unless seller requests otherwise in writing. So what I'm reading here is if you request it, they have to give it to you. So if seller shall provide to seller the inspection report portion or as requested by seller. So it seems, I mean, I'm not saying, it seems ambivalent.
Yeah. When we read 7 here, again, like we did earlier, it just says seller can request it right here. It's in the agreement right now. That's what they're explaining.
Well, yeah, so I guess I'm not trying, but it says request otherwise in writing, and once you add it into the inspection report,
I know.
you know, so it just seems ambivalent, so it's.
Unless there's attorney, like I said before, unless there's attorney drafted language, boilerplate language in the agreements they're signing that says like an actual, you know how the 35R literally goes step by step by step, you're back and forth, and it gives a timeline. There's no timeline in this. Like, how are you gonna get the other party to perform? That's my whole point.
Right, no, what I'm
Well,
saying.
we gotta crush that, because we gotta get through the rest of this.
Okay.
All right, additional time. Let's keep going here.
No, I'm.
Okay.
That way.
Okay, so additional time for the inspections. If an inspector so recommends, buyer shall have additional time to obtain further evaluation of any item by a specialist at buyer's option and expense if on or before the end of the initial period, buyer provides notice that buyer will seek additional inspections and upon seller's request, a copy of the inspector's recommendation. If buyer provides timely notice of additional inspections, and if requested by seller, a copy of the inspector's recommendations, buyer shall have, so it's 5 days by default. What do you think's a good timeline for additional inspections for adding on? What do you think? Is 5 good enough?
Not really.
I don't, it's,
Depends.
Talk to your contractor and see when you can get them out.
it really depends. My whole point to bring up about this is that we actually dealt with a deal this year that our listing broker literally had no choice but to say no to every single thing that the buyer requested, because guess what? The buyer broker actually wrote 1 day on every single thing in here because they thought they were being competitive. When you have the seller has 1 business day to try to get bids and stuff, is that gonna happen? There's no way. The listing broker's like, well, we need to extend this, and then the broker was like, well, why? What, you guys are trying not to, work with us? They're like, what are you talking about? Like, you gave us 1 day. My whole point to our listing broker is like, why did you agree to that? Why would you allow 1 day for your seller to be able to get bids and stuff like that? So all of the responses, literally, this is what it was. Every single one of these were all 1 day. Additional inspections, 1 day. Sellers shall have 1 day. Buyers reply, 1 day. They did every single thing was 1 day. Don't do that. I mean, typically when you're in that, section of the form and you guys are like already got the request out there, I think the default ones are pretty decent. The only one that's probably not decent is probably the initial 10-day, right? I mean, most of the time I see in there is 5, because we know the 5 or less weekends and holidays aren't counting. You're typically getting more time than just 5, days to complete the inspection and to give your response. So just be really careful about the actual days that you put in there, because it can bite
I
you.
think they're also trying to sometimes align with the really aggressive closing day. You
Hey.
can't have so many days.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't add up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you wanna definitely, maybe look at the property. If it needs a lot of inspecting, then who knows? Then maybe you do have longer. It's all gonna come down to the timing of, okay, when can the home inspector get out there? When can they perform the inspection? How long will it take them to get the report back to you? How long will it take before you get to sit down with the buyer and actually have another consultation on, let's review the inspection, how to, the report, what's it look like? So you really gotta do a lot of work in there before you decide. All right,
Oh, well, inspection, don't you need like 2 or 3 weeks?
yeah, that's separate. Yep. All right. So buyer's request for repairs modifications. If buyer requests repairs or modifications pursuant to paragraph 3, the parties shall negotiate as set forth in paragraph 6. Buyer's initial request and seller's response made in accordance with the following procedures are revocable for the time period provided. We had a seller just about a month and a half ago was upset that the buyer took so long for their initial inspection. It was like a 4-hour inspection. You guys know what, like, inspections, some inspectors are like, they take a long time. This one was 4 hours. They were really upset. They called, and complained like, hey, the buyer's like been here for over 4 hours now. And I got to get back home and cook dinner and blah, they were just upset. So then when the buyer ended up wanting additional inspections, because the inspector's like, hey, you better get this roof looked by a professional, like it needs some further evaluations. Here's my recommendations. You probably better do this. So as soon as the broker sent the 35R, over, they're like, no, we don't want you to do this. Sorry, I'm not gonna allow you guys to come back and do it, inspection. You're done. I'm done. Does the seller have a right to say that? What did the seller agree to? They've already agreed to it. You need to make sure, listing brokers, make sure you talk to your sellers and communicate about how the process works. How long is an inspection? Make sure they understand, like they had this unrealistic idea that it was gonna be max of an hour, right? That's, probably not good. If an inspector's in and out of that house in under an hour. And then also remind them that they've already agreed to the additional inspections. Once they sign and you get mutual, the additional inspections is already in the deal. I mean, it's already baked in. When they give that notice on the 35R, okay? If buyer gives notice of additional inspections, and then it goes straight into if requested by seller, the inspector's recommendation is attached. The time for buyer's response is extended as provided for in paragraph 5 of Form 35. It's got one line for the 35, for this 35R for the buyer to sign, and they're gonna send the notice, and that's it. Their timeline starts. When does it start? Well, the following day, commencing day. Now, people get confused with this 35R too. Last year, we had a deal. We had another deal where the broker sent the 35R and they had a 10-day home inspection contingency, okay? They had a 10-day home inspection contingency. In fact, let's use our calendars for this little exercise. We got mutual today that had a 10-day home inspection contingency. If they were to issue a notice of additional inspections, let's say they got mutual today. All of a sudden, on Friday, they did the inspection. Right? And then on Monday, they gave the notice for additional inspections. When's the 35R due by, and by what time?
28, 9 PM.
9 p.m.'s late. You say 9 p.m. all the time, it's late. It's
Before that.
due 8:59 p.m. It's your last moment.
So how about, if you communicate, with the listing agent before, hey, I'm just a little bit late, but I can just get you 9 p.m., but still you're after.
If you hit 9 p.m. late, it's waived. Waived.
Anytime before 9 PM.
Yes.
Since we're back on the calendars, I just want to point out, and I'm sorry if I'm wrong, please let me know, but when we look at computation of time, the first line says, unless otherwise specified in this agreement, any period of time measured in days and stated in this agreement shall start on the day following the event, commencing the period, and shall expire at 9 p.m. of the last calendar day. So in that sense, unless it's a possession date, closing date, or you're counting backwards, it can actually end on a weekend.
No.
It's right here. I read the whole thing 5 times, and with that.
I'm
very first
$1,000,000% positive.
$50.
Okay. I actually taught the 35R with Annie for Washington Realtors.
Then I'll push back on her and say that sentence
No, I
right
would
there,
pay $50.
that sentence right there, because it goes into unless it is possession date, closing date, or counting backwards, that very first sentence is saying it's 10 days from that. And therefore, the first question, it could end on the 23rd. So I'm down.
All right,
And we'll do
who did the calculations? When was the additional inspections due by?
Is what if you, instead of a number of days, what if you put on April 2nd, you put a hard date in there?
That's, you specified.
Yeah.
That's different.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where you're going.
No, I'll show you, Jim, I'll show you.
No, I know
in
what
this
you're saying.
computation of time, in that very first line, it only says that you're counting the date. Yeah, in the inspection, it is 10 days. And I will gladly give you $50 and talk to Annie, because that sentence says exactly that it could end on the 25th, and it should end. So this is fantastic. I'm glad I'm here. Because I put that and I've explained it that way, and that's how it reads to me.
I get you. All right, we gotta keep this thing moving so we're not busting the 12 p.m. time. Okay, so 5 additional inspections. We had mutual on the 15th and we gave it on the Monday, the 20th. When is it due? The 28th, because the 27th is a holiday. So it's 5 days. Weekends and holidays do not count. So there's a danger when additional inspections come into play. People get confused and like, I had 10. So now I got 5 additional. I get to add 5 to the 10. Now I got 15 days. But remember what we read? When the notice is given, when does the timeline begin?
For the next day.
Commencing day. It starts the next day. We had a deal where the broker did the inspection super fast. They immediately sent the 35R giving additional inspections. So their actual timeline ended up being less than what they thought. And so they actually sent the notice late and they waived it. Luckily, in that deal, we got things to work out and the seller did cooperate and actually did some of the items and they still closed. But either way, if they wait, if you miss it, it's being waived. So it's another one of those booby traps that, everyone can kind of like fall into. So again, just be careful on that one. Okay. Buyer's request for repairs or modifications. If buyer requests repairs or modifications pursuant to paragraph 3, the party shall negotiate as set forth in this paragraph 6. Buyer's initial request and seller's response made in accordance with the following procedures are revocable for the time period provided. So can't you can't revoke the time period is already given. So the very first thing in 6A is the seller's response to request for repairs or modifications. And let's see, Karen, you want to read 6A?
6A. Seller's response to requests for repairs or modifications. Seller shall have blank days, 3 days if not filled in, after receipt of buyer's request for repairs or modifications to give notice that seller agrees to repairs or modifications proposed by buyer, agrees to some of the repairs or modifications proposed by buyer, rejects all repairs or modifications proposed by buyer, or offers different or additional repairs or modifications. If seller agrees to the terms of buyer's request for repairs or modifications, this contingency shall be satisfied and buyer's reply shall not be necessary. If seller does not agree to all of buyer's repairs or modifications, buyer shall have an opportunity to reply as follows.
All right. So B will be buyer's reply. If seller does not agree to all the repairs or modifications proposed by buyer, buyer shall have 3 days have not filled in from either the day buyer receives the seller's response, or if seller fails to timely respond, the day seller's response period ends, whichever is earlier. 2, either 1, accept the seller's response, at which time this contingency shall be satisfied, or 2, agrees with the seller on other remedies, or 3, disapprove the inspection and terminate the agreement, in which event the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. Okay, so this is the key thing in here. Attention buyer, these time periods for negotiating repairs or modifications shall not repeat. The parties must either reach a written agreement or buyer must terminate this agreement by the buyer's reply deadline set forth in paragraph 6B. So this is a key thing. Okay, buyer's inaction during buyer's reply period shall result in waiver of this inspection condition, in which case seller shall not be obligated to make any repairs or modification whatsoever, and this contingency shall be deemed waived. So when you are in the middle of negotiations, okay, to break it down, you've got your buyer's first notice of how long is the inspection, contingency, and how long is it for the deadline in order to have the inspection performed, and the notice given. That's what this first deadline is. The next deadline is the seller's deadline. Okay. If buyer sends over and requests seller to repair a roof or whatever the item is, whatever it is, seller's going to have their 3 days, business days, to review what's been given to them and for them to make a decision, for them to get bids, to do whatever, right? After that moment, seller could potentially counter and say, no, I'm not gonna do the roof, I'll buy you a home warranty. They could say anything they want, whatever it is, doesn't matter. What did seller essentially do? Well, they replied, but what did they contractually do? They countered, right? They countered what the buyer requested. And as soon as a counter is given, it's up to that buyer to decide if they want to accept that counter or to what? Or reject it. They could reject and terminate, or they could offer an alternative remedy, right? Or they can offer something else. But as soon as a buyer counters the seller's counter, can the buyer go back and then accept what the buyer what the seller originally offered?
No.
No? How come? Well, they countered it. As soon as you counter back, you can't just go back in time and go, okay, seller, we'll accept what you offered. We're good.
It shall not repeat.
Yeah,
Negotiate.
the timelines aren't going to repeat there, and you could be in trouble. So make sure you communicate with the buyer so that they fully understand that whenever you are going to not accept what the seller is offering, that you guys have a plan and you can try to get something done before that deadline. You literally can go back and forth 1,000 times. You could literally have the 35R, right? Now, bear with me. This is just, fake words here. We would never just say this. Okay, fix roof. Seller's like, nah. Give buyer a dinner. Okay, whatever it is. So seller rejects but offers that. As soon as the buyer's like, no, that's not good enough, you can request, right? You can still reject what seller offered, but you can offer the attached alternative proposal for modification or repair. Buyer acknowledges that the inspection contingency will be waived unless buyer and seller reach written agreement or buyer gives notice disapproving the inspection and terminating the agreement before the deadline in paragraph 6B of the inspection contingency form 35. So whenever that last deadline is, it is set in stone. It's not going to change. You could keep taking this same 35R and you keep doing a new 34. And you could be sending it back and forth. As long as you're still in your last window. If you guys want to like actually calculate, right? Let's say we gave the inspection, it was due by the 28th, like in our 10-day example. We sent it on the 28th at 5 p.m. When is the seller's response due? The 31st by 8:59 p.m. is the last, moment to get it over to the buyer broker, right? So at that point, the buyer could go ahead and say, now you got June 1st, right? That doesn't count.
To the 5th.
Second doesn't count. So now you got 3rd, 4th, 5th. So the June 5th by 8:59 p.m., that is your set in stone complete deadline for the inspection contingency. You literally can be playing tennis just back and forth with the same 35R, this same one that you filled out, and you got a new 34. And you guys are just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, like, oh, how about this? What about this? You could just do that all the way till 8:58, and all of a sudden, like if you guys are like, we're not getting anywhere, seller's not giving us what we want. If you're like, we're out, now you can send the 35R, which you're gonna have to send the one that the seller sent from this moment. And then the buyer can actually make the decision to terminate, and you would send this with the form 50, and you guys are out.
Hey, Eric,
So that-
one of my agents have a question on time frame on that. Can I ask you something?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so you're up there where you're on seller's response to buyer, seller rejects all proposals by buyer, but they're going to give them a dinner for 2. Can
Yeah.
we've got irrevocable timeframes. Can they say there, like, buyer only has until tomorrow at 5 o'clock to respond to this addendum? Can they try to unilaterally change the time frame? They can't, right?
Can't. Nope. It's already in the boilerplate language of the 35. It all falls back to that same thing about the notices thing. Like you can't get them to say, oh, I'm fine with now changing the timelines, because it's only one-sided. Think about it. Just the seller's agent's like, no, we don't want to give you 3 days now. Like, we're only giving you 1. You can't do that when they've already agreed upon it. How do you amend a contract?
You can't change the date. on this inspection timeline if everybody's agreeing to it?
Oh, hold on.
Sorry, am I jumping?
You're jumping ahead. How do you amend a contract?
Mutual acceptance on both parties.
Yeah, but what would you use?
34.
You would have to redo and restructure the language to amend your new agreement. This area, the timelines and everything is already done. It's set in stone. It's just why we get sellers sometimes like, and I'll give you this example. What if a buyer says, you know, they write down all these items, everything, they send it over by their deadline, and the seller ghosts you. You don't hear nothing. They do nothing. You hear nothing at all. And then the buyer broker's calling the list broker like, yo, what's going on? And you're like, well, I don't know. My seller's not doing anything. They're not gonna do nothing. Okay? What is that essentially? What essentially did the seller do once that timeline passes? What do they basically do?
Rejected it?
Quasi just said it. Say it louder.
They rejected.
They rejected everything. They basically just
Buyer gets
rejected.
nothing.
No,
Well, buyer has an opportunity to reply.
the buyer has the opportunity to still, their timelines are set in stone. The buyer can still go ahead and like, and we literally had this because we found out that, oh, they got a much higher offer, a backup. And the items were pretty small. Because they were like, why aren't they doing it? Why aren't they responding? So if the seller goes past their timeline to their defaulted 3 business days, it's exactly the same as the seller just marking that box and sending it to you. Your buyer's timelines are still set in stone. So at this point, like in that scenario I gave you, buyer's like, okay, we're good. We accept to move forward. They were pissed. They're like, you guys can't do that. We didn't respond. That's what they said. We're like, you better go talk with your DB. So these timelines are set in stone. If you want to amend them, you can. The parties can do it. You can do it on the 34, but just don't forget. The timelines, the sands of time is still falling. Like the timelines are moving. It's regardless of, you know, because we had a situation just last summer where they were trying to amend it and it sounded like they were fine. And then they didn't even get the 34 signed and then they were past their deadline and then the buyers waived it. That happened last year. So it's a dance. You guys are gonna constantly kind of be in these situations where you're trying to, you know, work the deal, get things put together, and you want things to work out right for each client. But just don't forget, these timelines, just like it says, they don't repeat. They're set in stone. They're already agreed upon.
Can you flip flop it to what happens to the buyer if they don't come to an agreement? We had that. What happens?
They waived it. I mean,
Buyer waives,
yeah.
if you don't come to an agreement,
Mm-hmm.
but I've never gotten to that. That actually happened
Yeah.
2 months ago.
Yeah.
They didn't come to an agreement. The buyer's agent waived it. She didn't even know she had waived it.
Yeah. Like I said, it's definitely one of the things that gets most people in trouble. Let's see. Let's continue on the last part of the 35 so we can fully connect the dots and finish up on the stuff. Okay, repairs. Let's see. Oops. Let's say, who wants to read? Repairs, number 7.
If seller agrees to make the repairs proposed by buyer, then repairs shall be accomplished at seller's expense in a commercially reasonable manner in accordance with all applicable laws, no fewer than blank days, 3 days not filled in, prior to the closing. In the case of hazardous materials, repair means removal of treatment, including but not limited to removal or at seller's option, decommissioning of any oil storage tanks of the hazardous material at seller's expense as recommended by and under the direction of a professional selected by seller. Seller's repairs are subject to re-inspection and approval prior to closing by the inspector or specialist who recommended the repair, if buyer elects to order and pay for such re-inspection. If buyer agrees to pay for any repairs prior to closing, the parties are advised to seek the counsel of an attorney to review the terms of that agreement.
Okay. When it comes to having sellers responding to the repairs, this is definitely another one of the largest booby traps in the contract that we deal with. Whenever you are writing out a response for remedies and for repairs, you have to keep in mind, no matter what, when you are the buyer broker and you are writing these things, I want you to remember the 5 W's. What are the 5 W's? Does anybody know? Who? Who's gonna do it? Who do you want to do the actual repair or replacement? What? What is it specifically? Where is it? Where is it located? What, you sometimes people write, we see these addendums. Seller to replace window. Oh, good thing my house has one window. I know exactly which one you're talking about.
That's why I highlighted on the inspection report.
Yeah, and send it to you, right? Okay, where, right? When do you want it done? Now, in the 35, it says when it is done, but how many people remember that 35? Obviously, they forget all the time because they send inspection pages. You really want to make sure you're defining the when to every single time to say all these items to be done. How many days before closing would you think is better?
5 days.
Why would you put 5? Because you learned it yesterday. Okay. We got to go back to the boilerplate language of our Form 21.
So walk through 5 days prior.
Yep. So closing in possession in section F, there is always this boilerplate language that applies. Okay. Buyer reserves the right to walk through the property within 5 days of closing to verify that seller has maintained the property and systems, appliances as required by this paragraph. Seller shall not enter into or modify existing leases or rental agreements, service contracts, or other agreements affecting the property which have terms extending beyond closing without first obtaining buyer's consent. So buyer has that right, no matter what, to go back and walk through the property within 5 days prior to closing. Do not miss those days. Do not miss the timeline. 5 days, right? I would say no matter what, if you're doing it like a day before closing or the day of closing, shame on you. That's bad. That's really bad, because as soon as you're on the days, you're out of time if there's issues. Because if there's problems, how are you going to deal with it if there's no more time left? Okay, that's the part that will bite you. I had a deal, one of our brokers in South Hill had a doctor, surgeon, very busy all the time, buying this was back in like 2014. So this house was like 1.7 and like overlooking like Federal Way kind of area, like with the water and everything. So back then, a price that high, how that home nowadays is probably 3 million, easy. It's seriously the day before closing, and our broker's like, hey, we got to go do the walkthrough. We got to do the walkthrough, got to do it, and of course, the surgeon's too busy. I can't, I'm obviously don't have time. Single guy, like, do you have anyone else I can come with, whatever. You really don't want to be the one person to go, but if that's the only person to go, you better go. Our broker goes to the front door. He goes and he's looking for, he's getting his phone ready. He's going to open the e-key. And all of a sudden he like kind of looks down, he's like, what the hell is that? There's water coming through the door jamb. It's leaking out, a whole bunch of it. And he's just standing there kind of frozen, like, what in the, and he opens the door and water just comes rushing out. There's a huge giant hole in the kitchen where pipes broke and it fell through, sheetrock, insulation. I mean, it's a mess everywhere. And here our broker was literally like, he was this close to basically like, oh, I guess I won't go.
Mhm.
And it would have closed.
Mm.
Buyer had already signed. It would have closed and you know, it would have been one of those deals and actually the buyer ended up on this actual case. They actually did not buy the home because as our broker's there, the neighbor came over and said, what's going on? You know, kind of like just happened to kind of see and saw the mess and like here, he's like, oh no, I need to call, you know, someone who's like, whoa, this is crazy. He goes, man, he goes, boy, before they listed the property, they had tarps up on this roof. That's what the neighbor says. Nothing disclosed about all these issues the property had. So anyways, they walked. But these are the things like, if it doesn't happen and you don't do it, there's nothing you can do. And one last comment about that. If the home is vacant in the very beginning and you go view the property and you go to on closing day, what do you think the condition's gonna be like?
Hopefully vacant.
Let's hope it's still vacant. Let's hope it's still vacant. So vacant properties, when you see them and that's the condition they're in, it's probably gonna be the same exact condition when you close. So don't let buyers get in their mind, like when you mark that box, seller shall clean the interior, you know. It's probably gonna be exactly the same. So just make sure that you guys are, you know, explaining that to buyers and stuff like that.
That's a very good clarification point, that the seller can clean to their standards of cleaning.
Exactly.
I've had that,
Oh,
but if
yeah.
you want it differently,
Yeah.
like, clarify that by a professional.
What do buyers always have? They're buying a home and then what do they have in their mind? What do they think? What's the seller gonna do?
Oh,
Professionally clean it.
No, of course the seller's gonna clean it. They're gonna clean it. And this is exactly what we had, like, you know, where we had in a vacant home. And they're like, no, the seller's moved, they left the country, you know, like, that's it. You're buying it, you know, and here the buyers are like, what? They didn't hire cleaners?
So luckily I've never had that situation, but what do you do? If you have, it's the last day, buyer signs, right?
Which situation? The one about the cleaning
Yeah.
thing
The
or the water? Oh, yeah. Well, one, you're calling to halt release and reporting.
For sure, yeah. But then after that,
So then after that, it's more or less like you might have to extend, the buyer still want to move forward. I think, you know, I mean,
but
it's
to
a,
terminate,
so remember what does the buyer reserve a right to do? To make sure the seller what? Maintains the property?
Yeah.
And it's in the same condition in which you viewed it? The condition changed of the property.
okay, so what's what form am I using to?
So there's no actual, oh, property condition changed form. They're not. That'd be nice. They're like, hey, we're out. It's a notice, by the way. It's our, you know, you return the earnest money.
It's like
Right.
fire, so see ya.
So the attorneys do this on purpose. They're not gonna like give that to us. That you would have to terminate. You would have to use a 51 and actually use a rescission in the event you are rescinding the deal. And you're just gonna state the reason of the rescission, you know, you're gonna back up your information and say the property condition clearly changed. We had one, I guess that's been about, oh man. I guess that's been about 6 years. Shoot, I was thinking it's like 2 or 3. Someone's car drove through the home. Like the week of closing. It's an accident, drunk driver, took out the corner of the house. You know? One of these things, it just happens. Things happen.
I mean, I know we're going down a rabbit hole, but like, what
Yep.
does constitute? Like, I had a closing and then the buyer broker called me that night freaking out because they had moved out, it was vacant and somebody moved in. I guess, Look at that.
Squatters?
Yeah, they were gone, but they almost burned the house down, cause they like had all the ovens on and the other things, and it was a mess and broken window and all this kind of stuff, and I was like, yeah, you sure probably looked at it this morning. But like, let's say they had looked at it and it freaked them out. Because, you know, they were a young family and a baby and they probably lived in the hood. They bought it. Anyways, but my point is, would that have been, could they have backed out of something like that, or? It's
Well-
really gotta be kind of.
It's really, I mean, you're gonna have you guys gotta remember something. And this is something that goes for any contract, regardless if this thing is, if it's going smooth as glass, right? And you are on top of everything, you're on your A game. You send the 35R over and you're like, yeah, there's just too much with this and we're terminating. Who has to sign off on that release of earnest money? The
So,
seller has to agree to it, regardless of if the buyer's within their right. We had a deal where the seller was pissed. They're like, no, we're not giving the money back. You didn't buy. Like, what are you talking about? And of course it had to go to interplead. And now it's what, $750, I think they eat of it. Used to be 500 and they raised it. There's our buyers, no matter what, when they get into an agreement, that is the danger. It's regardless if they are within their right. So you really want to make sure that you're backing it up as much as possible. There's an old school saying is he who documents wins in a court of law. You got to document everything you can. Make sure you upload that in SkySlope. All right, what time is it? 11:45. We got a few more things to cover. Pop quiz time. Home inspect, buyer has a home inspection contingency. It's 5 days. Okay, today's mutual. And buyer just terminates. They never even had a home inspector go see the house at all. They didn't go, nope, didn't schedule nothing. Can the buyer do that?
yes,
But they didn't have it inspected. They said they're having it inspected.
They can inspect it themselves.
buyer's
Why would they
objective,
bring it back? They didn't come back to the property.
They showed up.
They didn't show up. No, I watched on the ring. I was watching for their car.
Malfunction.
it's buyer's objective way out.
I think it's.
Okay, I want you guys to remember this and remember this clearly. Okay, a buyer, this is a get out of jail free card for the buyer. They can terminate for any reason whatsoever. Oh, the buyers drove by at midnight and they didn't like the way the moon shines on the northeast corner of the property at 12:30 a.m.
That would keep
So
me
they're
up all night.
terminating. It does not matter, but I need you guys to promise you will not fail your buyers by opening your mouths unnecessarily.
Right.
When the buyer terminates the agreement, and I hear this one all the damn time, what do they get? Cold feet. The damn cold feet ruins deals. It ruins so many deals, doesn't it? Oh, my buyer's got cold feet. They're so cold. Well, I just bought them extra wool socks. Okay, they can close. Do not open your mouths. If they're terminating, they're terminating. It does not matter what reason. Do not offer up the reason. If the listing broker starts pounding on you like, well, why are they terminating? Why are they backing out? Just say, I'm sorry, the buyer elected to terminate the agreement. Just stick to that. Do not say the words cold feet. Oh man, my buyer's got cold feet. It's a first time home buyer. Do you know how it is?
Okay.
You start opening your mouth and saying that, is cold feet a legal excuse to get out of a deal?
No,
What do you think what will a seller do? What will a seller do when they find out buyer got cold feet and that's why they're walking away?
Keep that earnest money for the
Try,
client.
well, earnest money or specific performance.
So just please, when it comes time for that, just do not offer up anything. Awesome.
Question, so let's say you got Metro today, right?
Yep,
You have 3 days to deposit the earnest. You have 5 days to do the inspection.
Mhm.
But tomorrow you're doing an inspection and you haven't deposited the earnest.
Mhm.
You can do that?
well, your deposit of the earnest money is defined in the agreement on when it is due.
Right, and then
Okay.
at that point in time, because the earnest money wasn't deposited, the Form 35R is just fine.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's no earnest money deposited and the buyer's electing to terminate on the 35R, you don't need a 50 to go with it. It's already, there's nothing for a seller to have to agree to release the money. What was that?
It reduces the risk of dispute of the earnest.
Right, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally. All right. So next thing we gotta talk about is oil storage tanks. How do you find out if there's oil storage tanks on a property? Fire marshals. Yep.
It was what, 8?
Depends on when the record keeping, it depends on the city and the county and the actual stations that actually did records, so it could be complicated. On-site sewage disposal systems advisory. Buyers advise that an on-site sewage, what is going on here?
I was like, you're drawing.
Whoa, that is weird. All right. Yeah, that was bizarre.
I just said, I was.
Okay, so buyers advise that on-site sewage disposal systems, including septic systems, are subject to strict governmental regulation and occasional malfunction and even failure. Buyers advised to consider conducting an inspection of any on-site sewage system in addition to the inspection of the property provided by this Form 35 by including an appropriate on-site sewage disposal inspection contingency, such as Form MLS Form 22S. Don't forget, when it comes to septics, that absolutely you must include the proper septic addendum to the county in which the property is located. The MLS has multiple septic forms for specific counties. If there's not one for that specific county, just like it says here, you got to use the 22S.
But if you don't, just use the 22S in King County.
There's a form for that. There's actual language for the county for each property, so.
I know that, but. But if you know. Newbie
Okay.
agent, they write.
Here, if you, now you're a listing broker and you allow that, you're allowing like a lesser, like, here's the level of, transactional excellence. Do you want to be up here or do you want to be down here? That's really what it comes down to. There's a form for that, there's a form for that, there's a form for that. Most of every single thing you will need ever is already done. It's already made for you. All right, neighborhood review contingency. This is one of the ones, I mean, we rarely see these. Maybe if somebody's not familiar with the area, they might utilize that. Okay, we've got to start talking about the 35R and drafting and proper writing of the 35R, because this is something that constantly gets messed up and causes issues. Please, please, please avoid words like should, may, possibly. We have seen the craziest contracts written. We have buyer brokers that write, seller should replace the windows prior to closing, a seller expense. If a seller signs off on that and they close and they don't do any replacement of the windows, are they in breach? But why not?
They should, but it doesn't mean they have to.
It's like they're trying to be polite in this.
Yeah.
Like they're afraid of.
Yeah, like, oh, I don't want
Seller will.
Yeah, I don't want to say that they have to,
Yeah,
but they probably should do it.
that'd be really nice.
Yeah. Just so whenever you're writing these, you gotta be specific words of who's doing, who do you want to do it? What are they going to do? Where is this? When do they have to have it done by? And maybe even the words, or why? Why are they like?
But wouldn't why get into this whole like inspection report thing? We need to replace roof. Why? Because it's failing.
Why not?
Well, we just said we shouldn't say stuff like that. But I mean, I feel like we should.
Is that disclosure?
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, when you are asking. what you're
Yeah.
saying.
It depends on the situation or what it is. If the roof is completely failed, and there's mold in the attic. There's buckets up there catching the water that's been dripping for who knows how long. Okay? Yeah, whatever. It's perfectly fine to be completely descriptive, to write out the language to state that seller shall, replace the roof by a licensed and bonded roofing contractor prior to closing, within 3 days of closing or 5 days of closing at seller's expense. That one, that's pretty specific, but I am gonna give you guys the actual very best way to CYA whenever you are asking for items to be done on an actual property. Because this is how the process was always meant to be done. And I've talked to many attorneys about the inspection contingency, about why did they do it this way? Why isn't this in there? Why can't they do this? Had tons of questions, and people came back all the time saying that, hey, we really built this process to make sure that brokers were working in a way that they could have time to have the professionals come out, give a bid for their buyer, and then for the buyer to ask the seller to actually perform all the items on the bid. So the very, very best way for you to actually give the response is this. Seller, remember the who? Shall hire ABC roofing company and complete all items on the attached bid within 5 days. Actually, we'll do the disclosure thing of the when after all of it. Seller shall hire ABC Roofing Company and complete all items on the attached bid at seller's expense. Okay. So now you've got the bid, you've got your 35R. You're attaching the bid to the 35R. Is there any danger in that? Is that the inspection report? No. The buyer's asking the seller to actually hire who they choose to hire. I want you guys to key in on some of these things. They're hiring who the buyer wants to do it. And that the whole bid is exactly what is going to be done. You don't have to write anything. There's nothing for you to write besides seller to hire who and what are they going to be doing? Every single thing on that bid. That is like the cleanest, very best way for you guys to actually request items. Because there's no danger in anything getting skipped or you forgetting like, oh, I didn't ask for them to also do the roof caps and the blah, 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 all the little nitty gritty of what's going to be done by that roofing contractor. Because that's the things we kind of tend to see that come back. Like, well, yeah, the seller patched the roof, but you didn't say to replace the boots and the, all these other things that were leaking.
Right.
Right? So this is the very best way. Why is this the very best way for our sellers to go ahead and do something like that and agree to do it? Can you guys think about why would it be amazing?
The buyer chose the contractor.
Exactly. If there's issues later on, so make sure, listing brokers, that's something for you to talk to your sellers about. Like, hey, we're going to hire who the buyer wants us to hire. They're the ones that are going to do the work. Yeah, we get our own bid. It looks like it's within the range, right? And it looks reasonable. If there's issues later on after closing, who's the buyer going to call? I would tell them to call Ghostbusters probably, because realistically, I didn't choose that contractor. You did. So this is seriously like the number one best way for you guys to actually write items to be done for a seller.
And then should we just tag on to that by the day?
Yeah, like if you're doing, like, you know, there's multiple items for you to do. Seller shall hire clean crawls and complete all items on the attached bid. At seller's expense. Clean crawls bid?
Link Girls just no longer in business.
That's great.
For real? I just heard commercials for them even still. That's weird.
They have someone that's taking,
I call Stone. Those guys are better and a little bit cheaper. And they've even done where seller can pay at closing for the work. Okay, so all repairs to be completed. Oops. Typing too fast. Within 5 days to closing. To provide all receipts. Oops. All receipts, seller provide all receipts and warranty. Warranty. All right, so that's your kind of catch-all, that all repairs to be completed within 5 days prior to closing, seller to provide all receipts and warranty prior to closing. Or you basically want to like tie things together to say, hey, you hire these people of the buyer's choice. It's got to be done, you know, within a certain time so you can do your walkthrough to make sure it's all done, right? And then any of the receipts, warranties, and all that kind of stuff should be provided too. So it's one of the things that at least it gives, you know, all that documentation back to the buyer.
Eric,
Yep.
even though the buyer gets the bid, we still want to make sure they're bonded and licensed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, all that's for everything. That's always for, no matter whoever you're, if you're the one, yeah, if you're referring them to them.
Well, no,
Definitely.
the buyer's doing everything.
Oh, yeah.
Bid, but they're doing this work before closing, so we want to make sure the license is bonded.
You don't have, in this situation, Dale, you don't have to think about who hires these contractors. Who's hiring them?
Well, technically, the
Sellers.
Sell it.
The seller's hiring them. The buyer didn't. The buyer didn't hire them.
but the buyer told them to hire.
Yeah.
So what if they weren't licensed?
That's definitely where the danger zone is. Yeah,
We
that
still-
could be
we
something.
Still want to make sure it's bonded.
Yeah. I think it's a good idea, no matter what. All right, you guys, it is 12. We went over a ton of stuff. The very last two things is the waiver. Okay, 35W, if you provide this, please keep in mind that if you did have the buyer do a 35P, the pre-inspections, we're still seeing, where is it? Yeah. We're still seeing this thing where if a buyer did a pre-inspection and they're waiving the inspection contingency in their deal, like, please make sure you're marking number 2. They performed the pre-inspection. There's no, like, don't like say they didn't. So make sure that you mark that properly. We're still seeing people mess up on that and still marking waiver. If the inspection is, if, you know, this is the last thing. All the time we hear this thing, and I'm still seeing it because of the competitive marketplace. It's, the home inspection is for information purposes only. You know, it's either gonna be a pass, fail, right? You see, you guys are guaranteed you're seeing this kind of, this words and these language. If a Form 35 is in there. Okay, if a Form 35 is in there. They have every right to do exactly every single thing we went over today, everything. To a T. They can ask the seller for anything, they can terminate, they could do whatever. They can ask for additional inspections, every single thing they can do, because it's conflicting language. It's the same thing of they're both right and they're both wrong, right? You don't wanna be that or in that situation when you're in a contract. But the danger, what I want to talk to you about, now that we read through all of this, let's think about this. They mark waiver. Or they just say, hey, we're just gonna, there's no 35 at all. And they wrote those words. You're the listing broker. It says, a buyer shall hire an inspector, and it's a pass-fail inspection for information purposes only. Yeah, whatever.
Didn't have days, then it's open-ended. Could go till closing date.
When is that? So you as listing brokers, what's the dangers in this? First and foremost, are they even allowed to be in the property with an inspector? Who's responsible? Who's responsible if the buyer brings an inspector in there? If the 35 is not in your deal, where's that language that says who's responsible if there's problems? It's not there, is it? So listing brokers, please, I don't think I would even allow, like, if they're gonna allow them to do an inspection, you better just use the 35. You might as well, because there's no language in there protecting our sellers. Oh, sorry, seller, it looks like the uncle fell through the ceiling in the kitchen. Yeah, he broke his arm. He's probably gonna sue you because you have insurance, because he needs to take a hospital, an ambulance to the hospital, get his arm fixed. There's no language. There's nothing in there that's protecting our sellers. And we see these get signed off all the time.
I think what it is I think that the listing agent is wanting to let that buyer know when they even suggest that pass fail, or they come in with the pass fail, is, hey, we're not gonna negotiate. But again, you can always renegotiate, right? But I think that's what they're trying to do, is like both parties have an expectation. Hey, I just dropped the price 100,000 for you to come in. This really is like an as is, and then they end up putting that languaging in there, which then just flouts the contract, right?
Totally.
They're just trying to set an expectation.
Which at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, it's why I say no, I'm not gonna do if you started asking for things, and if it's a yes, no, and it's too bad, you're out anyways.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
That's my point. Last questions?
just real quick, so there was a training I did from some attorneys like forever ago, and I thought I had it down pat till I'm now thinking, so we're talking about not including this at all, right? If you're, as a, buyer's agent, you just don't put it in. Like,
No 35W?
Yeah, like at all.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, 35W, or doing this. And one way, from a seller's perspective, it is actually much better, and I think it's not including, because then there's like the wording, this kind of makes sense to you, but something about, even though they're still waiving this, there's something in it that actually gives the buyer still a little tiny bit more protection. Buyer is not relied on representations, or it's protecting you as the listing agent.
Mhm.
Oh, it's a total CYA to include it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would do it.
but
Yeah.
if you're a seller or on the listing side, I think it was like, if they don't have it, it actually, it's better for the seller to take the one without it. Like if all things are neutral. And now I have to go back to my notes on that, but it was like a big thing from the attorney saying, like,
Maybe they're probably, because the only thing that's coming to mind is probably the information verification period protection for our sellers for that whole time, for them to allow them to verify everything. So it's probably has to do something with that, because if that's waived too, that is actually bad for sellers. Even though brokers are like, oh, that's great because there's no contingencies, it's satisfied and waived. We talked about this at sales meetings before and at other training sessions, that there's, at that point, once you're already in the deal and the deal closes, what's the buyer's only option in the future? Since they had no opportunity to inspect and no opportunity to verify anything. What's their only thing that they could do later?
so sue the seller for.
Sue the seller. That's it.
It's definitely just form though, but.
When you ask two things, like let's say ask for credit and repairs.
You could, but you cannot use the words or. Seller shall replace the roof prior to closing or give a credit of $50,000.
Yeah.
Then the seller goes, okay, they mark the box and agree to that. What did they agree to?
Right.
Yeah, but if you ask for repairs and 10,000 closing
Yep.
costs.
Yeah.
You can't.
On, what if the seller wants to do something themselves?
We read it in the 35. What's the word that they use? Commercially reasonable manner. What that means is if it says you need to replace the light bulb, a seller's very capable of going up and screwing in and replacing a light bulb.
But as far as verbiage, do we need to do that? Do we need to say that the seller is gonna replace the light bulb and not some licensed and bonded contractor?
If you were agreeing, so it all depends on the language that's being written on what they're requesting the seller to do. So in the event that this item is not something a seller is commercially reasonable for a seller, like, oh, seller shall replace roof prior to closing. Like, we've seen these words all the damn time. So the seller's like, okay, I'm gonna get up on the roof and start taking these shingles off, right? And I'm gonna replace it my damn self. There's the contract, they've already agreed that it's something that makes sense, if they're capable, like.
Yeah.
They should not be taking on the risk to do something that they're not an expert in.
Yeah.
Definitely not like, oh, I'm gonna replace a roof.
So what if they are owning a company, like the one that I'm doing right now?
Mhm.
So he said, I have a company, I'll fix the foundation, I'll fix everything else myself. So
I mean, are they licensed? Are they bonded? I mean,
Yes.
it's up to the buyer if they want to agree to that. But see, if you don't give those exact words on who they're gonna hire, this all comes back to my example of the very best way to ask for remedies and repairs is to have the inspection performed. Uh-oh, there's an issue the inspector identified. Come back, give your notice for additional inspections, get bids on that item. Take your bid, connect it with the 35R, seller shall hire this company and complete all items on the attached bid within 5 days prior to closing at seller's expense. Like you have, like that is concrete sealed. They're not gonna say, oh, I thought I could do it myself. If they agree to it, they're agreeing to it. It's all coming down to that language that buyer brokers are writing. If you're very vague, well, I thought you were saying the seller could do it. Seller to replace roof prior to closing. Who's gonna do it? Remember who, what, where, when, why? Like when you're writing these, like you better make sure that it's clear for all of those 5 things. Or you're setting yourself up for danger or for issues in the future. Jim?
If your seller is being asked to do repairs, and it's somewhat vague, and sometimes it is, better make sure you understand that that's kind of a blank check. And you may want to put a dollar amount not to exceed X, because what happens is when the contractor comes in to find more work, all of a sudden they just added $30,000 to the bid.
Yeah.
And your seller is potentially obligated if the seller is going to fix the water leak. That type of thing.
Yeah.
So you may want to be conscious of putting a cap on your obligation to sell.
Yeah, we probably see those more times when the seller is countering back and saying that, we're gonna cap at this.
But we've run into that a lot.
Oh, heck yeah.
Not a cap.
We've ran into
Seller's got a blank check.
everything. All right, you guys. That is it for inspections. Hopefully you took away a few things today. I'm gonna do my stop share.
What's the bet between you and Sierra?
You're welcome. Thanks, Alec.
No, it's gonna-
Take care, you guys. Have a good one.